Hi guys. Oh, wait, hang on one second. Let me close this out. Okay. Hi guys. I hope you are doing well. I wanted to talk to you a little bit tonight about my own personal health story. Hang on, let me just make sure this is a little better. Okay. So I know that a lot of people are new to the group, so I thought that I would, just welcome you guys. I'm so excited to have you as part of the self-help community, so welcome. Please feel free to let me know if you are here, sign on, write a comment, say something, so that we can get to know you a little bit. So I want to, introduce myself, since I know there are some new folks, and then I'll go into kind of my own personal health story, and why that is important. My name is Alyssa Adams, and I created the self-help community, and I'm a psychologist by training and also a nutritionist, so I try to bring some of my background into what we talk about in the group. But one of the reasons why I started the free community is because I really so much believe in the power of self-healing, and that there's always something we can do to improve our health, right? There's always something that we can do to improve our health. So I'm really interested in self-healing and the power of the mind-body connection and what we can do ourselves to improve our health. Also, nutrition is something I feel really passionate about. So particularly, I'm really interested in the mind-body-spirit connection. So you'll see a lot of different posts and videos on things about the mind, things about emotions, patterns, beliefs, stuff that may hinder our health. And then in terms of body types of things, I'll talk about nutrition in that vein. And then spirit-wise, I talk a lot about meaning and purpose in our illness, affirmations, visualizations, kind of connecting with something that is greater than you. And really like the purpose of your illness or the purpose of your suffering potentially in your life. What meaning does that have? I'm also interested in just all different kinds of healing methods, all kinds of different integrative and alternative types of healing, which I think can be really helpful for people. And I'm also just sort of interested in like consciousness research. So on occasion you might see like a random post about that, or some information on that. So really all of the things that encompass sort of like what is the mind and how can that help you on your healing journey? How does it hinder you sometimes on your healing journey? So for me, that's stuff that's super interesting. So I hope that that's interesting to you guys too, because that is what we talk about in this community. Okay, so I thought it would be helpful to share a little bit about my own health story. I know other people may have heard me talk a little bit about this, but since there are so many new people, I thought it might be a helpful thing to share again. So it's kind of a long and complicated story, so I'm trying to narrow it down and make it as concise as possible. But the sort of shortcut, more nutshell version of it is really that I've had sort of like gut related issues throughout most of my life, like since birth, essentially, with periods of time where they weren't so bad and periods of time where they were more severe, that were sort of like an up and down process throughout my life, but never in a way that like really hindered anything that I wanted to do or my functioning really in any way, even though my symptoms could be kind of significant at times. And then I had a pretty significant, in my opinion, traumatic experience in 2004. I had a really, really close friend, my best friend, who was also an ex-boyfriend at the time, who passed away unexpectedly. So for those of you who see my journaling for healing prompts, really those focus around kind of processing some emotions that come after a significant life event. So for me, this was a huge life event, right? Kind of one of those events where you have like a before and an after. So it really affected me in a lot of ways. I found myself super anxious after. I was just kind of nervous all the time. I was dealing with a lot of grief. I was like crying all the time. And I was trying to finish college and was taking like a ton of classes at the time and trying to deal with finals and midterms and all kinds of stuff. So at least my experience with grief was that there really was like no room for it in your life, right? There really wasn't time set aside to actually sort of process what came up for you, or to process the anxiety, or to process the stress and the nervousness and the depression and the sadness and the crying, like all of these things that were swirling around, which for me meant just pushing it away or sort of like stuffing it down, right? Because I needed to finish college, I needed to finish classes, I needed to kind of just move through my life. So soon after that really significant event, I developed or had reactions to different types of food, right? So like sort of breathing difficulties related to eating food. So I know I talk about food sensitivities sometimes, but this was more in like the food allergy category, right? Where you're like, your breathing is affected and you're having more of like an immune mediated sort of immediate response to food. So that happened to me. I think it kind of happened. It's hard to explain. But I had this type of reaction with seafood and nuts. And so what else was happening for me, though, was that I was kind of having certain panic attacks, right? I was having episodes of anxiety. I was having difficulty breathing. I was having just sort of a bunch of odd symptoms where I was feeling kind of off. I felt like my chest was really tight all the time. So it was hard to tease out if I was having some sort of reaction to food sometimes, or if it was just this collection of symptoms that I was experiencing, right? So, but when I presented to the ER at one point, right, they were like, well, what did you just eat? And it turned out that it was like a crab cake at the time. So they were like, oh my gosh, you're allergic to all seafood, right? So then I got food allergy testing done, which is not great, by the way. I could do multiple videos on what's not great about food allergy testing and why it's often overinterpreted. But I won't transition into that topic just yet. But so anyway, so at this point in life, I was 22 and diagnosed with these two really serious life-threatening food allergies, foods I had eaten my whole life, right? And I knew that it was somehow related to this like trauma that I experienced, right? What I later learned as I did more investigation and more research is that when we experience a significant life event, our gut bacteria is affected, our gut functioning is affected, our immune system is affected, right? There are all of these things, our HPA axis is affected. So there are all of these things that occur that can translate into health-related issues, right? Physical-related symptoms, in addition to all of the emotional stuff that's going on, right? So for me, this kind of like intuitively made sense to me. I always knew there was something there that wasn't quite untangled yet. But it took many years of kind of investigating and figuring this out. So I lived for like 6 years as if I had these really, really severe food allergy issues, right? Like I was concerned about any kind of seafood or nuts touching my plate. I lived with EpiPens I carried around, right? Thought I was going to die if anything had touched my plate. So this is not great for like a person who's already dealing with like anxiety and panic, right? It just created even more anxiety. So I'll kind of wrap up that portion in a second, but I was all right for several years kind of just dealing with this. And then in 2009, when I was still living in Pennsylvania, I was hospitalized for a week for really erratic blood pressure, really low blood pressure, orthostatic hypotension. So as soon as I would stand up or even just sit up, my blood pressure would bottom out and I would start to pass out. I would be on the verge of passing out. My blood sugar was really dysregulated. I had horrible pins and needles in my hands and feet. I felt really thirsty all the time. I felt really like mentally fatigued. I had fatigue as well. I was kind of a mess. It was hard to function. At that point, it was so severe. I couldn't, finish my externship that I was doing for grad school because I couldn't sit up really long enough to like be in a session with a patient. So I was in the hospital for about a week, and they didn't really have a lot of great options, didn't have a lot of great suggestions. Told me I would sort of like grow out of it. That was one. Someone told me I was like a hypochondriac, right, which they tend to do for young females. But then at some point we kind of stumbled on this like pretty significant B12 deficiency I had. So without trying to figure out like why might someone have a B12 deficiency significantly, as well as like a vitamin D deficiency and other micronutrient deficiencies, like at 27 or however old I was at this point, they just kind of sent me on my way to get B12 shots, and then they put me on 2 medications to increase my blood pressure. Was like, go live your life. And I was like, well, this isn't a great solution, right? So you're on this medication that has side effects of like enlarging your heart. It's trying to increase your salt retention to just keep your blood pressure up. It was horrible, right? So I'm just kind of trying to get through for the next couple of years, really. I remember there's definitely days I remember trying to like get up early in the morning to go to my internship at this point and checking my blood pressure, and it was like 80/50, right? And I felt woozy and dizzy and sick. No wonder. I mean, I felt horrible. My blood pressure was still all over the place. So I was then hospitalized again in 2011 because same sort of set of symptoms, right? This time more severe, still really erratic blood pressure dropping, feeling like just really woozy and out of it, and super weak and super fatigued, and just really pretty awful. So this time I'm living in a different state. I'm in DC at this point. And I was given a crazy amount of tests, just tons and tons of tests. Was admitted to I think I was on the neurology floor at this point. I was told I had MS, and then told I didn't have MS, and then I was told I had an autoimmune disease that was shutting down my autonomic nervous system, which was terrifying because, the estimate is like you have a few years maybe to live until that stops working. You can't live without an autonomic nervous system. And a whole host of other pretty scary possibilities. So at this point I just like wanted some sort of answer, right? Like I don't know. Even though some of the diagnoses were super scary, I felt like as long as it had some sort of name or thing I could wrap my head around, I wouldn't feel so confused about what was happening to my body, because I used to function fine, right? And now I was deteriorating. I couldn't sit up again. I couldn't function. I couldn't work. I was living in this new city trying to finish my internship. And I was incredibly frustrated, right? And scared. So they started me on IVIG infusions. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but it's like a intravenous gamma globulin. So it's like an immune protein, I believe, because they were treating me as if I had an autoimmune condition at this time. So I had 3 treatments of it, 3 days in a row. I just knew it was not a good idea. I just knew this wasn't going to be helpful to my body. And then I had complications from that and had, 2 things kind of came together for me to have this headache from hell, right? I had the worst headache I ever had in my life because I had a reaction, most likely, to the IVIG. And I also recently they gave me a lumbar puncture, which is one of the things they do to kind of help diagnose MS, the day before. So those 2 things, which sometimes can give you a headache anyway, those 2 things came together to give me this nightmarish, awful, awful headache where I like couldn't move, couldn't get up. My legs felt really huge and swollen. I was having all these strange symptoms because of this reaction I had to the IVIG. And they discharged me, feeling more horrible than when I came into the hospital. I was dizzy. I could barely see. I had vertigo. I had this horrible headache. I couldn't move. My legs felt like I was walking through water or jelly because I had so much inflammation from the reaction that I had. I remember going home and being like, well, I'm worse than when I went in there. Like, what am I supposed to do? So I slept at home that one night and then went back to the hospital the next day. And they readmitted me and sort of tried to do a different type of workup at that point, but we're never really successful, I think, in finding anything that was meaningful or helpful to me. So I kind of just suffered and was frustrated for, I guess a few months at that point. I was taking B12 again. I was back on B12, back on, I think, a medication to help my blood pressure. I was just super frustrated, right? And I felt like crap, and was scared because I didn't know what was happening, right? It feels like your body is not your own. So I had a good friend who I shared an office with who was such a tremendous help and really introduced me to this whole world of functional medicine and integrative medicine. And so I bounced around to a few different providers, but was able to find a couple providers who I think were really interested in sort of getting to the root cause of what was going on, right? And not just trying to like patch it up with like glue and sticks, right? But actually figuring out what was causing some of this and able to kind of unravel some of these symptoms. So I saw several different providers. They all contributed different things that was helpful in getting closer to figuring out what was going on. I saw an amazing acupuncturist who was really helpful to me. I worked with a health coach for a period of time. And slowly I ended up having Reiki too in the future, a few years, but created this healthcare team, right, who was all looking at my symptoms from a different perspective than I had in the hospital, than I had with my other physicians, right? They were looking at it from a way where they were trying to connect things together and trying to actually unravel what caused it. I remember talking to my acupuncturist at the time and sort of describing this collection of symptoms, and she was like, yeah, okay, that makes sense because this is related to this, and this is sort of how Chinese medicine sees the body. And I was like, oh my God, they make sense to you, right? People have been looking at me like I've been crazy for years. And it was really just validating to sort of hear that this kind of collection of symptoms made sense, right? And there were other humans in the world who've experienced similar things. So I dramatically changed my lifestyle, right? I didn't have alcohol for like a year and a half, maybe. I slept a lot to try to heal and my adrenals and reset my nervous system. And I cooked. I learned how to cook. I radically changed my diet. At that point, I had eliminated like gluten, yeast, eggs, dairy, a whole bunch of stuff. Was cooking everything I was eating. I cleaned out all of my cosmetics and shampoo, and I had an air purifier, and I like dramatically changed my lifestyle. Pretty much everything you could do to like clean out your life, I did. And it may sound sort of extreme, but I felt like I didn't really have another choice, right? I felt like I was functioning so poorly that like I had to take pretty dramatic action. And sometimes when I'm talking with people about making health changes and they're kind of like, I don't know if I want to do that. I'm like, you must not feel that bad. Because when you feel really bad and you feel like your functioning is impaired and you feel like you are at the bottom of the barrel, you will pretty much do almost anything. You will learn how to cook. You will look up recipes online. You will read blogs and research articles and everything you can possibly get your hands on and books to try to heal yourself. You will. You know, if you want it badly enough, you will get it. I'm not saying you have to take extreme action, but I'm saying that sometimes you kind of do, right? You can base it on however crappy you feel, right? But it was really, really important for me to get well. Really important. So I did all those lifestyle changes. I found some really great providers, and that was a tremendous, tremendous benefit for me. So I really continued to get better and better, not in a linear fashion. That is not how healing works. But I did over time get better and better and feel better and better. But one of the things that I think is so, so important to share, especially in this group, is that I also needed to address some of those emotional pieces, right, that were never really addressed, and addressing some grief and addressing some patterns that I had created and some beliefs I had and some things that really needed to be reset in my mind and healed and worked through really before my healing could go up, could improve. I sort of had hit a plateau for a while. And I really feel like the mental work, the psychological work was really, really hugely helpful. So then I started meditating and doing more yoga, and really working on my beliefs and my patterns and these emotions that I hadn't really worked through, and doing a lot of different types of work, right? And doing some Reiki after I learned it and got some training at work. and just doing meditation and really being able to focus on sort of that mind-body connection, and knowing that if it was able to help create some symptoms, that it could also be used to heal, right? So really tapping into the power of that was so, so critical for me. I know other people have had similar experience. I know other people have, because I've seen it, I've heard it, right? Your mind is incredibly powerful, right? It can keep you stuck. It can create symptoms. It can fuel or exacerbate. So there are so many different ways that you can address things. Started doing a lot of visualizations because I'm kind of a visual person anyway. But really started exploring this whole other realm of health that I hadn't really touched on before, right? That was incredibly helpful to me. And then I started learning a little bit about like psychological factors that can contribute to illness, and how different things sort of get stored in the body, and what impact certain types of events have on the body, right? And how does that change your nervous system? How does that impact how you feel? How does that impact how you see the world and how you see your own health and your own identity? And really, what meaning did this event have in my life? And then my health crises, what meaning did those serve for me? And kind of learning about how to incorporate that into who I am and how I see myself and how I view health and healing really changed. So I feel like that is the kind of nutshell version. I'm more than happy to answer questions, because I so believe in healing and I so believe in fighting for your health. So if you have questions, post them, ask them. I'm happy to talk about this, but I hope that this lets you guys get to know me a little bit better, lets you get to know my story a little bit better, and why I care so much about all of the stuff that I'm talking about in the group. So, all right. Well, let me know if you have questions. I hope that was so helpful, and welcome to all the new folks in the group, and I will talk to you guys soon. Have a good night.